This is February the 13th, 1990. My name is Malcolm Menzies. I'm visiting at the Moore home in DeBolt to reminisce about the early days in our area. We are taping the story for the Pioneer Museum in Grande, Prairie in order to have a permanent record of the experiences of the folks who helped to build our country. The tapes will be kept on file at the museum and will be available for research work and reference material.
Washington in 1912. Winnie DeBolt, the eldest child of Laura and Albert DeBolt. In 1919, my dad, his brother George, and the Mellon brothers, Ed and John, decided to move from the dry belt of Washington state to the Peace River district. They came by car to Edmonton, then over the ED&BC Railroad to Grande Prairie. There was land available for homesteading west of the Smoky, but it looked too open to these adventurers, so they came east of the Smoky, and after looking around for several days, returned to Grande Prairie, where they filed on homesteads. My dad chose the southwest of 12, 72-1 west of the 6th meridian. This was May 19th, 1919. DeBolt Hamlet is now a part of this quarter section. My parents' first home was situated where the fire hall is now. It was a log structure 12 by 24 feet, later enlarged to 24 by 24, and replaced in 1933 by a large frame home. My dad returned to Alberta in the fall of 1919, expecting to put up wild hay on the meadows and build shelter for himself and his horses before winter set in. This was in September, but he soon realized it was too late in the season, so he and the Mellon brothers went to Cluskin Hill, where they rented buildings and bought feed for their livestock. The winter of 1919 and 1920 was a long one, starting in early October and lasting until mid-May. They managed to bring their livestock through the winter, but not without much labor and expense, such as paying 50 cents apiece for wheat bundles, which they had to dig out of the stooks in 3 feet deep snow. On May 25th, 1920, my mother arrived in Grande Prairie with we 3 children, Dale, aged 7 weeks, Dorothy, aged 5 years, and myself, Winnie, aged 7.5 years. We lived at Cluskin Hill until February 1921. Our neighbors from east of the Smoky came over to help us move, perhaps 6 teams in all, so we were able to move all our belongings in one day. My parents were very happy to be settled on the homestead, as this was the first home of their very own. They had been renters in the U.S. Our DeBolt post office was established in 1922 in my parents' home. They became postmaster and postmistress. On February the 23rd, 1923, DeBolt School opened on the corner of the northwest of 12, 72-1 west of the 6th meridian, on Uncle George's land. There were only 6 pupils. 1 year later, we had only 5 pupils, as 3 had moved away and only 2 new ones arrived. July 4th, 1921, the first picnic was held. Sheila Peterson's home is now on that spot. July 4th date was chosen as most of the settlers were Americans, perhaps a bit homesick at that. My 2 younger brothers, Jack and Clifford, and 2 younger sisters, Frances and Georgia, were all born in the log house on the homestead. In 1927, my dad purchased a used steam engine and grain separator, which he used to do custom thrashing. The steamer was used to pull breaking plows and also to power a sawmill, which he had purchased a couple of years later. A trip to Grande Prairie and back took from 3 to 4 days. Very few women or children ever went on these trips unless it was necessary. After we moved to the homestead, it was 8 years before I went to Grande Prairie. People made their own entertainment. Picnics grew into full-scale stampedes, 2 days in length. In fact, we once had the largest stampede, I think, north of Calgary. The country club built a hall and received its charter in 1929. MacArthur's store opened in DeBolt in 1928 and Morrison's store in 1929. We had 2 stores for many years. There was a blacksmith shop in the hamlet. Over the years, as roads made car travel practical, this was replaced by a garage. Instead of parking lots that we now have, there were hitching rails to tie the team of horses to, and behind the hall and the schoolhouses were barns for the horses. The United Church of Logs was built in DeBolt in 1932, but we had only student ministers until about 1960. Before the church was built, services were held occasionally by traveling ministers in the schoolhouse or private homes. People grew their own meat and garden produce. Such things as lettuce, radishes, and tomatoes were only available in summer. Butter, bread, and all pastries were made at home. Water for livestock and household use came from the creeks or the sloughs. Snow was melted for household use in winter. Very nice soft water, but a real chore to keep a good supply on hand. Heating was entirely with wood in a cook stove and airtight heater. When Charlie and I built our home, we had our wood box built into the wall so it could be filled from the outside and emptied from the inside. We had a small water tank at the door and later a cistern, so water was near at hand. These were 2 very modern conveniences for those times, and I appreciated them very much. Most clothing was made by hand or sewing machine. I had no sewing machine when we were first married, but in 1940 we were able to send to a second-hand store in Winnipeg for a machine, which cost $6, and the freight on it to DeBolt was $4.09. Incidentally, that machine is now in our local museum. I prized that sewing machine more than any other household convenience I've received before or since. I guess I should say here my clothes dryer was the next best appliance I've ever received. Most housewives did their shopping for clothes for the family by mail order from Eaton's or Simpson's, which is now Sears. In 1941, Charlie and I, purchased our first combine, a Massey Clipper, with a 6-foot cutter bar, and a year later a Massey tractor. This combine was perhaps, if not the first, one of the very first combines in the whole Peace River area. Over the years, horses and power equipment gave way to more power machinery. Trails became gravel roads, which later gave way to pavement. Grande Prairie became minutes away instead of days. Children no longer walk to school, but are picked up by bus at the door. Electricity and telephones, radio and TV are in every home, while natural gas heating is also available to all. As I look back over these 70-some years of my life, I am thankful for good health and a comfortable home, a caring family, also for parents who could always look forward to a better day. They were always, in other words, they were optimists. And I am thankful too to be living in a vibrant rural community which we can still be a part of. Thank you, Menzies and the Grande Prairie Museum Society, for giving me this opportunity to reminisce about the past, this 13th day of February, 1990.
Tuesday, February the 13th, 1990. This is a bit of history of our DeBolt area from 1930 to 1990, as being told by Charlie Moore. First, I must say, this is a thoughtful move by the Grande Prairie Museum Society to search for and record some history of early days from a new area. It was November 1930 when I arrived in Grande Prairie from Unity, Saskatchewan by train, a 32-hour trip, at the young age of 18 years. Guess I felt older than 18 years then, because I had not been home for over 4 years. so was well adjusted to finding my way alone. The sad depression of the 30s was on, but we weren't yet aware. Prairie was a small, muddy little town with a few board sidewalks and nearly 600 people. There were no train or buses to DeBolt. You walked or hitchhiked, however you wanted to travel. I went over to a grain elevator and asked who may be going east with a grain truck, and caught a lift for nearly 20 miles. Then more walking and more walking. After crossing the ferry, the Smoky River, and walking up that long, steep hill, an old Chev car came behind, stopped, and the driver said, "Jump in, young fellow," and introduced himself as Albert DeBolt. I did not know, of course, that Albert would become my father-in-law 5 years later. I had a brother here in DeBolt, Tommy Moore, who had came 1 year before me. I had came in here only to visit my brother, but he convinced me to take a homestead. After searching for days and days, we decided to file in the northwest quarter of 2871-26 west of the 5th meridian. The filing fee was $10. Us young fellows called that $10 a bet between us and the Alberta government. We bet we could prove it up and someday get the title, while the government bet we couldn't. It was just one day after my filing on this land that a statement was released by the government, which made me sort of feel that 10 spot slipping away. The statement released was to the effect that our soil was submarginal, grey-wooded, inferior quality, depleted of nitrogen, almost unsuitable for agricultural use. This area was now settled with a homesteader on almost every quarter section. Many families, and few with any money. With the depression of the 30s, we were all unable to turn back. Our only alternative was to learn to live with our lot and for each other. We convinced ourselves that the concept of self-help was a must in rural development and would require individual initiative. Mr. Robert Cochran, a leading farmer from the Grande Prairie area, told me that clover seed production may be our salvation for this grey-wooded, depleted soil. So the weary trail of forage seeds marched along. Trials and tribulations was our lot, but we were armed against them as any farmer must be, with hope and ambition and courage. Nothing is ever lost until these words are abandoned. Then everything can be lost. So whatever we do in life, we should never lose our hopes, our ambition, and our courage. We were so fortunate in this area in having such a variety of nice people, all of different walks of life, such as Mrs. Laura DeBolt was a postmistress, Mr. Lathwell was a lawyer, Mr. Ringle a bricklayer. All these people I'm speaking of had homesteads and settling here. Mr. Nystrom was a carpenter, Mr. Robertson was a butcher, Mr. Perkins was a shoemaker, Henderson was a druggist, Nielsen was our doctor, Mrs. Stevenson was our nurse. We had many, many musicians. Albert DeBolt was a blacksmith, a farmer, and a politician. They came here for many different reasons, but the Depression kept most of them here. During the 30s, and even on until 41, credit at the bank was almost limited. During those years, it was often said that the banker's mouth was of kind of rounded shape from saying no. But by 1941 and on, credit became available. Seemed to take war. By 1980, credit was so available that many young farmers overspent at a time an unforeseen recession was approaching. Many lost their farms. I do believe the suffering of the foreclosures in the 80s was worse strain on people than the lack of credit during the 30s. Winnie DeBolt and I, Charlie Moore, were married in Grande, Prairie on the 21st day of August, 1935. And at this date, February the 13th, 1990, we were both able to walk, run, dance, curl, and work, all with caution. We are very thankful in being so fortunate, considering that we were born way back in 1912. We have 6 in our immediate family: Maurice, Marvin, Norman, Lynda, Vernon, and Brian. We have 5 daughter-in-laws, 1 son-in-law, 12 grandchildren, and 7 great-grandchildren. We commend the Prairie Museum Society for your efforts in asking for this history.
In some of the history books, there's stories about your brother Tom and what an inventor he was. Do you remember some of his more successful endeavors, or some of the things that he did?
Well, he had the idea of tearing something apart when he was a little boy to see what was inside of it. That time often he didn't have the ability to put it back together, but he could annoy his dad by tearing it all apart. He wanted to know why something ran. When we came to this country in the early 30s, he, having less to do here and wondering what to do, caused his inventive mind to develop even more. He wanted to build a tannery, to tan hides. He got going at it, got it started, but Albert DeBolt, my father-in-law, needed him up in the sawmill to work, and he came down to get him, and that kind of bogged down. There wasn't no more tannery. The tanks and equipment he had already built were left around for years. He, at that time, I do recall, in 1932, Tom said to me, "Someday," he said, "we should start building trailers, something that a guy could get into it, live in it, go up the road with it tied behind a car or truck. Someday this country will go on wheels, you know," he said. "Someday they'll run up and down the road on wheels, live in them. We should start and build them things, you know." Well, that never materialized, but he had the idea of it. Way back, I do remember when I was about 12, and he was 15. We were digging potatoes on my dad's farm. He had 7 acres of these potatoes, and we had to plow them out with a plow and pick them up in the mud by hand and crawl along there. Tom said to me one day, "This is ridiculous, you know, all of us people out here," and there was quite a group of us, about 7 hired people and us, and picking these potatoes. And he said, "This is ridiculous. We should have something that would do this without having to get down here in the mud with your knees. We should have a potato digger, something that would go along there and dig them up and shake the hell out of them and put them up, elevate them up," he said, "and they should elevate up and they should go into a bag even, all by a machine, you know, that should be done." Well, that was a pipe dream. So we thought at the time, he didn't seem to think so, because when he was over in England during the war, he visited a potato farm where they were digging them by hand over there, somewhere about 1941. And he said to that man, same as he had said to me way back years ago, this is ridiculous digging them things by hand. I'd like to get a chance someday and build a potato digger that would just dig them up and bag them and everything. And by gosh, the guy said, Tommy, you're the guy I want. But after the war, this man got Tom to come back again to England, and he built the first potato digger that would dig potatoes, elevate them up, grade them, sort them, and put them in a bag. That was the first potato digger that we ever knew of. And he had a lot of ideas that fell asleep, like building the trailers back there. He was 20 years or more ahead of himself. The trailers come out somewhere about 1960. I'd say he was nearly 40 years ahead of him. About 30 years ahead of the trailer, his idea was. He was always thinking of something, like the time he helped George Grisby build the shingle mill. It worked, and it done a lot of good in the country. We got buildings around here with shingles on yet.
The mats.
The mats in DeBolt are shingled with them. There's granaries out here shingled with them jack pine shingles made with that shingle mill. Tom had problems in that his education was insufficient for his imagination. One time I recall him down on the floor in the shack making a circle around, and he was going to measure the circumference of the circle, and he wanted to find out the radius and the diameter. And I said, Tom, what are you doing down there marking on the floor? And he told me what he doing. I said, give me a piece of paper and I'll figure it out for you quicker and easier than that. Oh, this'll do. No, I said, look, Tom, but this is the problem the poor boy had. He sometimes couldn't figure out the things he should know, but he got some way. He'd find some way of finding out how that should, the size of that circumference or the diameter or the radius, he find it out down on the floor with a piece of string. But nevertheless, he was a terrific welder and understood metals, and that helped him a lot, but he developed that. He ran a shop in DeBolt for a lot of years, worked with a good blacksmith.
Well, you were always pretty progressive too, weren't you involved in the registered livestock in fairly early in?
Yeah, I was different than Tom. He and I would sit around, he'd talk about something he should build. And I'd talk about some good seed we should have brought into this area, because it's not being brought in. There's a poor quality stuff coming. I used to tell him the need of better livestock in the area. Us farmers just have to have better quality seed and stock. That's the makings of a farm, is to have something to start with. So, yeah, we produced and sold breeding stock of Yorkshire and Lacombe pigs for 21 years, and crosses between the two, and they were spread all over this Peace River country. I was kind of proud of that the grades from the Grande Prairie area shipment did improve immensely during them years. The same with the seed business. We brought in a lot of good seed to the area. But I don't want to talk about much what I had done. I don't want to talk about what Tom done.
Invent the feeder to feed the livestock. but he might forget to feed them. Well, Charlie knew the proper ration and fed them at the proper time. That was the difference.
After Tom got through inventing something like a good self-feeder, that was the end of it. He didn't like livestock, but I did. I enjoyed seeing a farm be loaded with good livestock and good seed and good agricultural practices. But I'd rather talk about somebody else than what I done. I let other people talk about me if they want to, but I don't want to. Sure nice of you to come out and see us, and I appreciate you being here, Mr. Menzies. We'll have a private little visit after this tape is turned off, and I hope you come back again someday just to have a little visit with us.